There's a moment in every Sagittarius's life when silence becomes louder than any argument, and 2026 will be filled with those moments. If you're watching this, it's not by accident, because something in the universe wants you to understand a truth about Sagittarius before it's too late. This is the year they stop explaining, they stop proving, they stop pouring energy into people who drain their soul. In 2026, Sagittarius becomes untouchable, not because they fight louder, but because they protect their peace like it's sacred ground. And when a Sagittarius chooses peace over pleasing others, the shift is undeniable. They don't burn bridges, they vanish. And the silence they leave behind, it teaches more than words ever could. You might think they're cold, but in reality, they're finally warm to themselves. In this video, I'll share 20 powerful ways Sagittarius will protect their peace in 2026. Ways that will surprise you, ways that might even make you question how you treated them. Because when Sagittarius decides to guard their light, the universe moves with them. And if you're on the wrong side of their fire, you'll feel the chill of being left behind. Comment below if you've ever had to walk away just to find peace. Let's begin with the first way. And it starts when Sagittarius stops explaining their absence. Reason 1. Sagittarius no longer explains their absence. There was a time when Sagittarius would disappear and feel the need to explain it. They would send messages to soften the silence. They would apologize for needing space as if rest required permission. They didn't want to be misunderstood because misunderstanding often turned into judgment. But 2026 changes that. This is the year Sagittarius stops explaining where they've been, stops justifying why they went quiet, stops shrinking their intuition to make others feel comfortable. They finally understood something deeply important. People who truly respect your presence will never demand explanations for your distance. When Sagittarius steps back now, it's not anger, it's not punishment, it's protection. They are protecting their energy from constant noise, from emotional expectations that drain more than they give, from relationships that require performance instead of understanding. In 2026, Sagittarius chooses silence over explanation. They choose space over guilt. They choose peace over being constantly available. And yes, some people will feel unsettled by this. They may say Sagittarius has changed. They may wonder why they don't hear from them anymore. But the truth is simple. Sagittarius didn't change. They finally stopped abandoning themselves. Many watching this will recognize that moment. The moment when you realized stepping back wasn't selfish, it was necessary. When silence became the only place you could hear yourself again. Life lesson. You don't owe explanations to people who benefit from your exhaustion. Protecting your peace is not withdrawal, it's wisdom. And this is only the first way Sagittarius protects their peace in 2026. Because once they stop explaining their absence, something else happens next. They stop forgiving the same behavior twice. That's where reason 2 begins. Reason 2, Sagittarius forgives once, but never the same thing twice. Sagittarius has always had a heart wide enough to hold contradictions. They understand that humans are messy, that love is imperfect, that even the best of us get it wrong sometimes. So when someone hurts them, they often forgive, not because it didn't cut deep, but because they believe people can grow. But 2026 marks a turning point. This is the year Sagittarius draws the line. They may still forgive you once, but they will not forgive the same wound twice, because they've learned the first time is a mistake, the second is a pattern, and repeating patterns are how peace dies. They're no longer interested in relationships where apologies come on a loop, where I didn't mean to becomes the soundtrack of something toxic. They're listening not just to words anymore, but to patterns, to actions, to what the energy truly feels like behind the promises. And when Sagittarius sees that someone is only sorry after being caught, or only remorseful when they're afraid of losing access, they don't explain, they exit. Not with a storm, not with a fight, but with finality. Because they know that trusting someone who has already shown you their limits over and over is how you teach yourself to suffer. Some of you might recognize this in your own life, that moment when the apology didn't land the same way anymore. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started caring for yourself more. Life lesson: there's nothing cold about walking away from repeated harm. Sometimes the warmest thing you can do for your soul is to close the door quietly and keep walking. If that speaks to you, share how you knew it was time to stop forgiving what was no longer changing. And yet, Sagittarius doesn't always protect their peace by leaving. Sometimes they do it by staying, but staying silent. Reason 3 reveals what happens when they become the quietest person in the room and why that silence speaks volumes. Shall we continue? Reason 3, they stay silent but fully present. There was a time Sagittarius filled every room with their laughter, their fire, their restless commentary. But in 2026, something sacred shifts. They begin to understand that sometimes the most powerful presence is a quiet one. This doesn't mean they've become distant or uninterested. It means they've begun listening to energy, not words. They're observing, reading between every line, paying attention to tone patterns, how they feel when they leave your company. And when something feels off, they don't confront it immediately like before. They sit with it and let silence speak first. Because silence is a mirror. It shows who becomes uncomfortable without constant validation. It reveals who only respects your voice when it serves them. Sagittarius, once fiery in conflict, now chooses stillness, because sometimes peace isn't about proving a point. It's about preserving your energy for what actually matters. You may notice them in a conversation, eyes focused, lips sealed. And what you won't realize is they're already making decisions in that stillness. Who stays, who drains, who aligns, and who doesn't. Life lesson: you don't need to react to everything. Some energies are best handled by presence, not performance. If you've ever had to protect yourself with silence, you'll know exactly what this feels like. But peace isn't just about silence. Sometimes it's about walking away before the fire burns too deep. Let's go deeper in reason 4. Reason 4. They leave before it turns toxic. Sagittarius used to wait until things fell apart. They stayed longer than they should, hoping time would fix what truth already exposed. They believed in potential more than reality and paid the emotional price. But 2026, that Sagittarius is gone. Now they walk away at the first sign of soul erosion, not because they're cold, but because they've learned how long it takes to recover from things that go too far. They no longer romanticize the idea of endurance. They value peace over chaos, and they've come to understand that not everything that feels intense is love. Sometimes it's unhealed wounds looking for company. So instead of arguing until their voice cracks, they whisper goodbye and go before they start losing themselves, before they start questioning their worth, before they start calling damage devotion. And the world won't understand. Some will call them flaky. Others will say they never stay long enough. But Sagittarius knows peace requires leaving places that threaten it, even if the exit is lonely, even if it means starting over. Life lesson: the strongest exit isn't the one filled with noise. It's the one that happens when you value your sanity more than your storyline. If you've ever left quietly, not because you stopped caring, but because you started healing, you're already living this truth. But sometimes walking away isn't the hardest part. The real test is what happens next, when Sagittarius chooses joy over emotional memory. That's where reason 5 begins. Reason 5, they choose joy over sentimentality. Sagittarius is a nostalgic soul. They can hold on to memories far longer than people realize, not because they want things back, but because they treasure what once was. They replay old jokes, remember the spark of first conversations, smell a place and get transported to a moment that felt safe. But in 2026, something clicks. They stop confusing sentimentality with loyalty. They no longer stay connected to people, places, or patterns just because it once felt good. They realize that holding on to expired energy, even if it comes wrapped in warm memories, is still a weight. So instead of revisiting the same stories, they write new ones. They choose joy, not just happiness, but the kind of joy that comes from alignment, from expansion, from presence. They still feel the past, of course, but they stop letting it be a reason to pause their growth. And if that means not texting back an old flame, they won't. If it means missing a reunion that feels performative, they pass. They choose the now, and they smile wider because of it. Life lesson. Just because something once made you happy doesn't mean it belongs in your future. Joy is not in the memory, it's in the movement forward. Some of you watching may be feeling this shift right now, and if you are trusted. Up next, Sagittarius protects their peace in the most unexpected way, not by speaking louder, but by lowering their access to the world. And that's where reason 6 takes us. Reason 6, they lower access without making an announcement. Sagittarius doesn't block you. They don't unfollow, make grand exits, or post cryptic quotes. In 2026, they simply lower access. You don't hear from them as much. The invitations slow down. Your calls take longer to return, if they return at all. You might still see them shining, still posting, still laughing, just not with you. It's quiet, unspoken, and intentional, because Sagittarius has learned that not everyone deserves the same level of access to their life. Not everyone gets to know how they're doing, what they're building, or where they're headed. They're not being shady, they're being sacred. This year, privacy becomes their protection, not secrecy, but sacredness. They understand now that peace is often threatened not by enemies, but by people who pretend to care. So instead of confronting, they reduce. Instead of explaining, they reposition. And instead of defending their shift, they let the silence speak for them. If you've ever felt someone slowly step back without burning the bridge, just letting it grow moss, you know how this feels. It's not cruelty, it's clarity. Life lesson. You don't owe full access to anyone who drains your center. Distance can be the most powerful filter of all. And for those who've ever had to protect their space this way, no need to explain. The energy speaks for itself. But peace doesn't just come from pulling back. Sometimes it comes from going full speed towards something new and leaving hesitation behind. That's the energy of Reason 7. Reason 7, they say yes to what scares them and no to what drains them. Sagittarius was never meant to stay still. Ruled by expansion, truth, and forward motion, their soul starves in stagnation. But in the past, they hesitated. They said no to opportunities out of fear of losing people. They delayed their growth to keep the peace. They said yes to obligations that didn't feel right because saying no felt too selfish. 2026 changes that rhythm completely. Now, Sagittarius says yes to what excites and terrifies them. The move, the solo trip, the career shift, the boundary that risks someone's approval, because they've realized fear and truth often sit next to each other. And if you never feel fear, you're probably not saying yes to your calling. At the same time, they now say no faster to conversations that feel like obligation, to invitations they dread, to energy that depletes instead of expanding. And here's the magic. Every yes to something bold becomes a statement. Every no to something draining becomes protection. And this is how Sagittarius builds a life that feels free again. Some of you may be in this exact place right now, on the edge of something that scares you, but also calls you. What are you waiting for? Life lesson, growth, and peace are twins. You don't get one without choosing the other. Saying yes to yourself sometimes means saying no to everything that's familiar, and that's okay. And yet, even as Sagittarius steps boldly into the unknown, they never forget to ground themselves, because the next way they protect their peace is subtle but incredibly powerful. Let's move to Reason 8. Reason 8. They ground themselves in routine, but leave room for magic. At first glance, you wouldn't associate Sagittarius with routine. They're wild, expansive, always chasing the horizon. But in 2026, they discover something that surprises even themselves. Routine is not a cage, it's a sanctuary. The version of Sagittarius that once ran from structure now creates it intentionally. They start their mornings quietly. They protect their nights from noise. They become selective with who has access to their time, not just their energy. And it's not about becoming rigid. They still crave adventure. They still leap when intuition calls, but they also understand that freedom doesn't mean chaos. They begin to anchor themselves in small rituals, morning walks, journaling without filters, turning off the phone at sunset, pulling back from the digital world to listen to something quieter, their own soul. Because peace isn't always found in movement. Sometimes it's found in consistency, in knowing what grounds you, in waking up and feeling like your day belongs to you again. You might not notice this shift from the outside, but those close enough will feel it. Sagittarius is still spontaneous, but now it's grounded in self-respect. Life lesson structure doesn't limit your soul, it supports it. Freedom, when rooted in self-discipline, becomes sacred. And maybe you found this too, that the smallest rituals can bring the biggest peace. And yet, while Sagittarius is building this inner sanctuary, they also make a quiet, powerful vow to never again be available to chaos. That's where reason 9 begins. Reason 9, they become unavailable to chaos, no matter how familiar it feels. There's a specific kind of trap Sagittarius used to fall into the magnetic pull of familiar chaos, the friendship that always felt almost right, the family dynamic that never respected their truth but kept demanding their loyalty, the relationship that ran hot and cold, always calling them back in when they finally started to heal. But 2026 brings a shift. Sagittarius now sees the patterns clearly, and they're not tempted anymore. They stop answering calls that only come when drama is brewing. They stop responding to texts that feel like bait. They stop justifying their absence to people who only notice them when peace disrupts their comfort. Because chaos, no matter how familiar, is still chaos. And in this season, Sagittarius wants peace that lasts, not passion that burns them alive. They no longer confuse intensity with importance. They know what stability feels like, and they want more of it. More softness, more stillness, more alignment. Some people will think they've become too quiet, but in truth, they're just no longer available to be the emotional dumpster for others. And if you've ever felt drained by the same cycles over and over, you already understand this version of Sagittarius. Life lesson. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's healthy. Breaking the cycle is the most radical form of peace you can create. But the most unexpected peace comes next, when Sagittarius stops trying to be understood by everyone and simply becomes unapologetically clear. Let's move into reason 10. Reason 10, they stop explaining themselves to be understood. For much of their life, Sagittarius has carried this quiet hope that if they just explained enough, if they just found the right words, people would finally understand them, understand their boundaries, their moods, their silence, their need to roam. But in 2026, something shifts. They no longer chase understanding because they've realized not everyone is capable of seeing you clearly, and not everyone wants to. They stop over-clarifying why they said no. They stop softening their truth to be digestible. They stop packaging their authenticity to make it less intimidating. Instead, they just live and let their actions speak. They don't yell over the noise anymore. They exit it. Sagittarius now understands that clarity doesn't always lead to connection, and trying to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you, that's spiritual self-sabotage. So instead of explaining, they express, without fear, without filters, without expectation. And something incredible happens when they do. The right people start showing up, the ones who don't need explanations to respect a boundary, the ones who get it energetically, intuitively, quietly. Life lesson. Being misunderstood is not your burden to carry. Protecting your peace means letting go of the need to be translated. And if you've ever felt exhausted from explaining yourself over and over, you already know the freedom waiting on the other side. Now imagine how powerful Sagittarius becomes once they've stopped needing to be understood. That clarity births a version of them that simply doesn't entertain nonsense anymore.
And that brings us to reason 11.
Reason 11, they don't entertain nonsense, even when it's disguised as concern.
It used to be hard for Sagittarius to tell the difference. Was this person being genuinely worried, or were they veiling judgment as care? Was that just a joke, or a subtle dismissal of their choices? In 2026, the fog lifts. Sagittarius now sees nonsense for what it is, even when it's dressed in politeness, even when it's coming from someone close, even when it sounds like love but feels like control.
They no longer explain away the subtle insults. They no longer give second chances to conversations that drain them. They no longer make excuses for people who play games with their emotions under the mask of just being honest. They know that peace is expensive and that nonsense is one of the fastest ways to bankrupt your spirit. So now when something feels off, they leave, mid-conversation if needed, mid-connection if required. No loud exits, no final statements, just gone.
And those who once fed off Sagittarius's energy, who thrived on poking, provoking, or passively putting them down, now find silence where there was once a fiery reaction. Life lesson: you don't owe attendance to every emotional circus that sends you an invitation. Peace is not passive, it's a choice, over and over.
If you've ever felt relief walking away from someone who confused kindness with control, you're already living this kind of peace.
And still we're not done, because the next form of peace Sagittarius protects is the most personal one yet, their own inner dialogue.
Let's step into reason 12. Reason 12, they heal their inner voice before answering to anyone else. In 2026, Sagittarius comes home not to a place, but to a voice, their own. For years, they've spoken kindly to others while speaking harshly to themselves. They've comforted everyone else's storm while criticizing their own quiet moments. They've been generous outwardly, but hard on themselves internally.
That ends now.
This year, Sagittarius protects their peace by healing the voice inside their head, the one that says, "You should be doing more. You're too much. You're falling behind." That voice, it no longer gets the final word. They begin treating their inner world like sacred ground. No more guilt for needing rest. No more shame for walking away. No more pressure to meet every expectation placed upon them by people who don't carry their weight. And you'll notice this change not in how they treat others. They've always been kind, but in how fiercely they now defend their own softness. They don't abandon themselves anymore to earn a seat at anyone's table. They know now their own table, their own voice, their own peace. That's home. Life lesson: peace isn't just about protecting your space from others. It's about protecting your mind from yourself. When the voice inside becomes gentle, the world outside has less power. And if you've ever heard your own thoughts echo like criticism instead of care, you'll know how life-changing this shift truly is. Because once Sagittarius reclaims their inner voice, they begin to notice something else, that not all light is meant to be shared. Some things are better when kept sacred.
Let's move into reason 13.
Reason 13, they stop oversharing their light.
Sagittarius is a storyteller. They've always shared openly dreams, heartbreaks, wild ideas at midnight, not to impress, but to connect.
But in 2026, that sacred urge to share becomes more discerning. Now they no longer tell everyone about their goals. They don't post every pivot. They don't offer their inner fire to every conversation. Why? Because they've learned some people don't come to witness your light. They come to dim it. Some conversations aren't safe for hope. Some rooms don't deserve the fullness of your fire.
So they begin to protect their joy like treasure. They hold their next move close. They let the magic build in silence. They create not for applause, but for alignment.
You might still hear their laugh, see their spark, but what's changed is this: you no longer know everything going on in their world, And that mystery, that's their boundary. They understand now that not every sacred thing has to be seen to be real. Life lesson: when your joy becomes precious, you stop handing it to people who don't value it. Protect your light. Let it grow privately. That's peace.
And if you've ever felt the regret of sharing too much with the wrong person, you already know why Sagittarius is choosing silence over performance.
But it doesn't stop there, because once they stop oversharing, they begin listening to something even deeper, the rhythm of their intuition. And that's where reason 14 begins. Reason 14, they let intuition guide, not obligation. In the past, Sagittarius often said yes too fast. Not because they wanted to, but because they felt they should. They showed up when they were drained. They agreed to favors when their spirit screamed no. They gave energy to people who only reached out when they needed something. That changes in 2026. Now Sagittarius doesn't move from obligation. They move from alignment. They listen not to guilt, not to pressure, but to that quiet voice within, their intuition. If something feels off, they won't rationalize it anymore. If someone's words don't match their energy, they won't ignore the discomfort. They trust the vibe, not the excuse. You'll see them turn down the invitations with a smile, decline conversations that feel manipulative without drama, pause commitments that feel rushed. And the beauty, they don't explain it, because intuition doesn't always come with evidence, but it always comes with truth. They know now peace comes not from pleasing everyone, but from honoring that first gut whisper.
Life lesson: when you trust your intuition, you don't need permission. Let your body speak. It often knows before your mind does.
And if you've ever felt that quiet inner no and ignored it, only to wish later that you hadn't, you know why Sagittarius now listens the first time. But listening inward isn't the only shift, because in 2026, Sagittarius also makes one of the boldest moves of all. They reclaim their time and stop rushing.
Let's explore reason 15.
Reason 15, they refuse to rush what feeds their soul. Sagittarius used to live in a hurry. They chased passion, purpose people, always on the move. And though their fire brought them far, it also burned through their peace. This year, everything slows down, not out of laziness, but out of intention.
In 2026, Sagittarius begins savoring their mornings. They speak slower, they respond later. They no longer feel the need to keep up with anyone else's pace or panic.
Why? Because they've realized that rushing often leads to regret, to missing moments, to skipping over intuition, to saying yes to things that don't actually feel right. Now they protect their peace by honoring rhythm, not urgency, not comparison, not pressure. They take time to answer questions. They take longer to commit, and they leave space between thought and action.
This doesn't mean they've lost their fire. It means they've mastered it.
Life lesson: slowing down isn't falling behind. It's choosing presence over panic, alignment over urgency. And if you're watching this wondering why life feels heavy, ask yourself, what are you rushing toward that your soul hasn't agreed to? Because up next, Sagittarius defends one of the most sacred things of all, their peace in solitude, even when the world tells them they should be doing more.
That's reason 16.
Reason 16, they embrace solitude, even when others call it isolation. There's a sacred stillness that Sagittarius used to avoid, not because they feared being alone, but because silence brought questions. Too many thoughts, too much reflection, so they filled the gaps with people, plans, movement. But in 2026, that changes. Now they seek solitude intentionally. They retreat without warning. They cancel plans without guilt. They crave the kind of silence that doesn't echo, it heals.
And sure, some people will whisper, say they're withdrawing, that they're not the same, but Sagittarius knows better. They aren't escaping, they're returning to themselves, to their voice, to the kind of peace that isn't conditional on who texts back or who shows up.
This solitude is not a void, it's a reset, a recalibration of energy, where they remember what they love, not what they've been tolerating. They walk alone, not because they don't love others, but because sometimes the noise of connection drowns the wisdom of the soul.
Life lesson: solitude is not loneliness. It's the decision to meet yourself fully without distraction, without masks. And if you've ever found your clearest answers in your quietest moments, you know exactly why Sagittarius protects that space now more than ever. And while they find peace in solitude, Sagittarius also sharpens their ability to choose something few ever dare: to pause rather than react. That's reason 17. Reason 17, they pause before reacting, even when provoked. There was a time Sagittarius would clap back fast. Words, sharp reactions, fierce. They didn't just speak the truth, they fired it. But now 2026 brings a new kind of power. The pause, not weakness, not indifference, just presence before response. Sagittarius no longer reacts just to feel in control. They understand that not every opinion requires engagement. Not every slight needs correction. Not every battle is worth stepping into. They've begun asking, will this cost my peace? And if the answer is yes, they walk. That pause is where their strength lives now. In the breath between trigger and choice, in the space where they decide if it's worth opening their energy to at all. They let others throw their shade, let gossip move around them like smoke. Sagittarius doesn't fan flames anymore, they extinguish them with silence. And here's the most powerful part: the people who once expected fiery rebuttals now find themselves arguing with air. Life lesson: you don't have to fight every fire. Sometimes peace is found not in what you say, but in what you don't say. And if you've learned to pause instead of explode, you know how hard and freeing that choice truly is. But Sagittarius doesn't just master reaction, they also reclaim something even more personal: their right to change without explanation, without permission. That's where reason 18 begins. Reason 18, they allow themselves to change without explaining it. Sagittarius has always been about evolution, but for years they felt the need to justify every shift, to soften their growth so others wouldn't feel left behind, to explain why they no longer fit into the spaces they once filled with ease. In 2026, they stop asking for permission to evolve. They let go of friendships that no longer resonate without guilt. They change their opinions, their routines, their direction unapologetically, not because they're lost, but because they've outgrown. Sagittarius now knows growth isn't always graceful. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's misunderstood. And often the people who resist your change are the ones who benefited from who you used to be. So instead of holding back, they let the transformation unfold in real time. They become quieter, deeper, more rooted in truth, and less concerned with being the same. And if someone doesn't recognize them anymore, that's okay. They're not meant to. Life lesson: you don't owe the past version of yourself anything except gratitude for getting you this far. Let yourself grow without explanation. And if you've ever hesitated to change because of how others might react, maybe this is your sign that it's time to choose you. But what happens when Sagittarius no longer explains their evolution? They unlock something even more powerful: a relationship with peace that's no longer negotiable. That brings us to reason 19. Reason 19, they make peace their non-negotiable. In 2026, Sagittarius stops compromising where it matters most. They stop bending to keep the room comfortable. Stop sacrificing their own peace to be the bigger person. Stop saying it's fine when everything in them is screaming, no, it's not. They draw the line clearly, gently, permanently. This is the year Sagittarius makes peace a non-negotiable. If it costs their mental clarity, it's too expensive. If it requires betraying themselves, it's off the table. If it only thrives in confusion, they no longer feed it. And that shift, it changes everything. You'll see it in how they protect their mornings, in how they choose their conversations, in how they decline access with kindness but firmness. They're not being difficult, they're being aligned. Because Sagittarius finally realizes peace is not something you find by chance, it's something you build and protect fiercely. Life lesson:
When you treat peace as sacred, you stop tolerating everything that disrupts it. This isn't selfishness, it's survival.
And for anyone watching this who's felt drained, trying to keep the peace with people who don't value it, you know exactly why Sagittarius doesn't negotiate with chaos anymore.
And now, the final way Sagittarius protects their peace in 2026 is also the most profound. It's not about silent solitude or boundaries. It's about something eternal. Let's move into reason 20 and the closing. Reason 20, they trust the timing of their life and let go of the need to control it.
Sagittarius has always had a complicated relationship with time. They're visionaries, constantly seeing what could be, but sometimes that future focus becomes pressure. They've chased things too soon, held on too long, feared they were too late.
But in 2026, Sagittarius surrenders the clock, and with that surrender comes peace. They stop trying to force timelines, stop obsessing over what didn't happen yet, stop replaying what they should have done sooner. Instead, they trust deeply that what's meant for them is already unfolding, without force, without fear, without frantic energy. They no longer grasp, they align. Whether it's love, success, healing, or clarity, Sagittarius lets it come at the pace of truth, not anxiety. You may notice it in their calm, the way they no longer chase connections, the way they smile, even when things are uncertain. It's not detachment, it's divine trust. They know now if it's meant for them, it won't miss. If it left, it wasn't a line. And if it's coming, it will arrive on time, even if the world says they're late. Life lesson. Letting go of control isn't giving up, it's growing up. Peace often begins the moment you stop resisting the flow.
And if you've ever tried to rush something only to realize it was never ready, or tried to hold on when life was asking you to let go, then you already understand why Sagittarius now lives in sync with the rhythm of trust.
Closing the final flame of peace.
So now you've seen it, 20 ways Sagittarius in 2026 will protect their peace fiercely, silently, unapologetically. This isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear. Not about pushing people away, but about pulling their soul back home. Because Sagittarius didn't wake up one day and decide to change. Life asked them to. Pain carved the boundaries, experience lit the fire, and peace, real peace, became the only thing worth protecting. If you're Sagittarius or you love one, you've likely seen this shift already. The distance, the silence, the depth, they aren't signs of detachment, they're signs of wisdom. And the truth is, when Sagittarius protects their peace, they don't just heal themselves. They light a path for others to do the same. Life lesson. Sometimes protecting your peace will cost you comfort, approval, and connection, but it will give you yourself. If any of these 20 reasons resonated with you, if you saw yourself or someone you love, let it be known in the comments. What is one way you're protecting your peace this year? We'd love to hear your truth. And if you haven't already subscribed to the Eternal Fire of Sagittarius, because here we don't just decode the stars, we live by their fire. Until next time, protect your flame and never apologize for the light it brings.